今日はご招待いただきまして誠にありがとうございます。
Thank you very much for your kind invitation today.
日本共産党の志位和夫でございます。
I am Kazuo Shi of the Japan Communist Party.
今安倍政権が平和安全法制の名で11本の法案を国会に提起しております。
As you know, Prime Minister Abe's administration is now proposing 11 bills related to security legislation. He calls this peace legislation.
私たちは憲法9条を全面的に破壊する戦争法案がその正体だとこの間追及してまいりました。
But we have been taking a very, very clear stand that, in spite of the fact that he calls this legislation legislation to ensure the peace and security of Japan, that actually what he is proposing is actually basically a set of war bills. In other words, bills that go against the fundamental tenets of Article 9 of the Constitution.
今日は世界から見た戦争法案の異常と危険と題しまして、冒頭若干の時間をいただいてスピーチをさせていただきます。
So I'd like to spend my opening remarks talking about two main aspects, and that is from the point of view of other nations. In other words, from the point of view of the world, how exactly does this security legislation appear? I would like to talk about the extraordinariness, the unusualness of this legislation now being discussed, and also the dangers inherent in it.
戦後、日本の自衛隊は半世紀にわたって一人の外国人も殺さず、一人の戦死者も出してきませんでした。
As you know, in the post-war years, the self-defense forces of Japan for the past half century have not killed one foreign person, nor has one person died in combat.
ここには憲法9条の偉大な力が働いています。
And the reason for that, I believe, is because of the tremendous strength and power of Article 9 of the Constitution.
そしてその下で、政府が戦後一貫して海外の武力行使は許されないという憲法解釈を取ってきたことも重要な要因として働いています。
And I think an important element that allowed this situation to continue for so many years is the fact that the government has taken a very consistent attitude about the interpretation of Article 9 of the Constitution. And its interpretation, the government official interpretation for decades has always been that the government of Japan does not have the right under the Constitution to send forces overseas to take part in armed attacks.
戦争法案はこの国の在り方を根底から覆すものです。
In other words, this idea of Japanese forces not being involved in combat abroad has been maintained for many, many years. However, what is now being proposed by the current administration is to overturn this understanding.
それは海外で戦争する国づくり、殺し殺される国づくりを進めようというものに他なりません。
In other words, I believe that what is being proposed now in this current legislation is that the government will now be allowed to wage war abroad. It will create a situation where Japanese forces can kill and be killed.
私は安倍首相との国会での論戦で憲法に反する3つの大問題を追及してまいりました。
In my deliberations in the Diet, when I spoke directly with Prime Minister Abe in front of the Diet, I presented 3 points, problems that I saw with the current legislation in regard, specifically, I mean 3 problems in regard to the constitutionality.
第一は、米国が世界のどこであれ、アフガニスタン戦争、イラク戦争のような戦争に乗り出した際に、自衛隊がこれまで戦闘地域とされてきた地域にまで行って弾薬の補給、武器の輸送などのいわゆる後方支援、兵站を行うことになるということです。
The first point that I considered problematic was that in the future, when the United States forces, with whom we have a very close relationship, wages war anywhere in the world, whether it be in Afghanistan or in Iraq, the self-defense forces will now be able to participate in what is called rear support, which basically means logistics, providing supplies to the actual combatants. That means, for example, replenishing ammunition, transporting weapons, and they will be able to take part in these activities anywhere in the world.
戦闘地域での兵站は相手方から攻撃目標とされ、武力行使に道を開くことになります。
Until now, this rear support concept was used in Japan for providing logistics, and the rear support idea means basically that this kind of logistical support would be offered only in areas that were considered to be non-combat zones. However, this is now going to be expanded, and the idea of these non-combat zones are going to be areas where possibly the forces could come under attack. It could lead to armed conflict.
第2に PKO 法の改定が大変なくせ者だと考えております。
Also, another cause for concern is the considered revision of the peacekeeping operations PKO Act.
PKO とは関係のない活動への新たな仕掛けが盛り込まれています。
What I'm particularly concerned about is that there are mechanisms now being put into place to revise the PKO law that has nothing to do with peacekeeping operations.
形式上は停戦合意が続いているが、なお戦乱が、続いているようなところに自衛隊を派兵し、治安維持活動をさせる枠組みが新たに持ち込まれようとしています。
In other words, although nominally the areas that are now being considered where self-defense forces can be deployed are nominally areas where there is a ceasefire in place. Nominally that is so, but however, a framework is now being proposed to be put into place where areas that actually have war or conflicts, armed battles occurring, even though nominally they are under ceasefire situation, self-defense forces will now be able to be deployed to these areas where there is, again, de facto combat taking place.
安倍首相は私の質問に対して、アフガンに展開し、3500人もの戦死者を出している ISAF、国際治安支援部隊へのような活動への参加を否定しませんでした。
I asked specific questions of Prime Minister Abe. In particular, I referred to the war in Afghanistan, where, as you know, there was an international force called ISAF, the International Security Assistance Force, which was led by NATO. And this was ISAF's activities resulted in 3,500 deaths of people participating in these combats. And when I asked if in the future it could be conceived that it was conceivable that the self-defense forces take part in activities such as ISAF, Mr. Abe did not deny that possibility.
戦乱が続いている地域での治安活動も容易に武力行使に転化します。
In other words, what is now being discussed in this revision to the PKO law is that self-defense forces will be able to be deployed to these areas where there is actual combat taking place, even if there is a nominal ceasefire in place, and their nominal role will be to maintain peace and order or establish peace and order. But the point is that since self-defense forces could be sent to these areas, they could very well be embroiled in actual combat.
第3は、日本がどこからも攻撃されていなくても、集団的自衛権を発動し、米国の戦争に自衛隊が参戦し、海外での武力行使に乗り出すことになるということです。
The third area of concern is the fact that even though Japan itself is not under direct attack, as a result of this new legislation being deliberated, it will be possible in the future, under the use of the exercise of collective self-defense, to send self-defense forces to participate in combat activities that the U.S. forces are involved in. In other words, it is possible for the self-defense forces to become embroiled in actual war worldwide.
我々はこれは一内閣の戦乱で、従来の憲法解釈を180度転換する立憲主義の破壊であり、憲法9条の破壊であると厳しく批判してきました。
We have taken a very, very strong stance against this. So we believe that this goes 180 degrees against the official interpretation of the Constitution until now. In other words, that any kind of armed self-defense activities are possible only in the territories when Japan's territories itself is being attacked. In other words, this activity, this legislation that is now being deliberated goes against the fundamental tenets of constitutionalism and goes against the fundamental tenets of the Constitution, and therefore we are very much against it.
以上述べた点からこの法案の違憲性は明らかだと私たちは確信しております。
This has been a long explanation, but because of these various reasons, we are convinced that the current legislation is it goes against the Constitution. It is in violation of the Constitution.
その上で今日は、世界から見ると この今、日本で起こっていることがどんなに異常で危険なのかという、その角度から少しさらに話しておさせていただきたいと思います。
And so I would like to again refer to what I said at the very beginning. So this is a situation that we have in Japan. It's very complex, but I've tried to describe it very, very succinctly. But now I'd like to refer to what I said at the beginning, which is from the point of view of outside nations, other countries, how does this situation, this security legislation debate look? In other words, what is the extraordinariness of it, and what are the dangers inherent in this legislation?
世界から見ますと、この戦争法案とその推進勢力には3つの異常と危険があります。
I believe that there are three aspects that are extraordinary and dangerous about this current legislation, which we call the war bill.
第一は非国際性です。
One is that it goes against international norms.
すなわち地球の裏側まで自衛隊の派兵を目論みながら、世界で通用しない理屈でそれを合理化しようとしています。
What I mean by this is that there is a great effort on the part of the people of the forces that are trying to push forth this legislation. There's a great desire on their part to try to be able to have the freedom to eventually deploy self-defense forces to the other side of the globe. And in order to be able to achieve this end, they are using logic or arguments that go against international norms.
例えば戦闘地域での兵站についてであります。
One specific example is this idea of logistical support in combat areas.
戦闘部隊に対する補給輸送などの兵站が武力の行使と一体不可分であり、戦争行為の不可欠な一部であることは世界の常識であり、軍事の常識であります。
What I am saying is that when one provides logistical support, the international understanding of logistical support is that it is part of combat military activities, in that supplies are being, ammunition supplies are being delivered to the forces that are actually fighting on the front, which means that since they are providing logistical support, they are, of course, open and good targets for enemy attacks. In other words, the Japanese word that is being used in direct deliberation is the word ittaika, which literally means part of the whole body or the same body. The official the government translation is being an integral force of military combat. So the fundamental understanding in the international community about logistical support is that it is part of the overall combat activities.
しかしそれを正面から認めてしまいますと、その途端に憲法違反になってしまいます。
However, the government is taking a very strong stance that goes against international norms, because if they accept the international understanding of logistical support and what it entails, then it would be a clear violation of the Constitution of Japan.
そこで日本政府はそれをごまかすために世界のどこにも通用しない、概念、議論を使っています。
So in order to get around this, in order to try to basically deceive and manipulate the argument, the government is using concepts and arguments that have no justification in the international community and that would not hold up in international community arguments.
お話をさせていただきます。
I'll explain it very simply.
日本政府が使っている言葉で、英語に翻訳できない概念がない3つの言葉があります。
To be very, very clear about it, there are three concepts that are being very much discussed and deliberated in the Diet that are very uniquely, that are so strange and that do not work in the international community that they cannot be translated into English.
英語に翻訳できないと私が言って高松さんに訳してもらうのは大変申し訳ないと思います。
I say they cannot be translated in English, and yet I have this interpreter that's going to have to struggle and try to do so.
高松さん上手にやってくれると思います。
The interpreter, I'm sure, will try to do her best.
一つはですね、後方支援という言葉です。
One strange concept that is only being discussed in Japan is the idea of koho shihen, which is literally translated as rear support.
これは日本政府だけの造語です。
It is a made-up word, a made-up concept that has been created by the Japanese government.
ご承知のように英語ではロジスティクス、兵站となります。
As you know, this is quite often translated into English as logistical support.
しかし決して兵站という言葉を使おうとしません。
And the most common word for logistical support in Japanese is heitan. However, this word heitan rarely comes up.
兵隊には前方、後方という、概念を含んでおりません。
The reason for that is if you use the word heitan, which is really the word that is normally used for logistics, logistical support, that means there is no rear and front. There's only overall 100% support.
日本の自衛隊がやるのはあくまで後方支援で、後ろの方でやっていて、前には行かないというごまかしです。
In other words, this is a way to try to mislead people. The government is using this strange word, rear support, because they want to define logistical support in a particular way. They want to say we're only going to provide support from the rear, and we're never going up to the front near where the battle is actually taking place.
2つ目の言葉は武器の使用という概念です。
The second strange term that is being used by the Japanese government, which again is only being used by the Japanese government, is the use of weapons.
武器の使用はするが、武力の行使に当たらない。こういうことを繰り返します。
It is a very, very strange term. I mean, it seems logical on the face of it, but the Buki no shio means use of weapons. However, it is differentiated as being a separate concept from budoku no koshi, which is the exercise of force. In other words, they're saying the use of weapons is not the same as the exercise of force.
安倍首相は、戦闘地域で自衛隊が兵隊を行う際に攻撃されたら武器の使用をする、use of weapon、これは認めました。
Prime Minister Abe in his deliberations has acknowledged the fact that if near combat zones, if the self-defense forces are providing rear-end logistic support and they come under attack, it is possible that they will use weapons to defend themselves.
しかし、武力の行使ではないと固くなに言い募るんです。
But he insists stubbornly and repeatedly that this use of weapons to protect themselves is not the same as the exercise of force.
そこで私は外務省に、武器の使用という国際法上の概念があるんですかと尋ねました。
So I went to the foreign ministry and I asked, in international community, in international understanding, is this idea of use of weapons an existing viable idea?
外務省から返ってきた答えは、国際法上は武器の使用という概念そのものがございませんというものでした。
The response from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs was that under international law, there is no concept that is similar, is equivalent to the use of weapons idea.
武器の使用はするが武力の行使に当たらないというのは世界のどこでも通用しない議論であります。
What I'm trying to say is that it seems almost ridiculous on the face of it. However, throughout the international community, this idea of separating the use of force from the exercise of force from the use of weapons does not hold water in any other parts of the world.
3つ目は武力行使との一体化という言葉です。
The third concept that is unique to Japan is the word ittaika, which again the interpreter just mentioned earlier. It means to be part of the same body or to be an integral part of the use of force.
政府は武力行使と一体でない後方支援は武力の行使に当たらないと言っております。
The government is taking a very, very strong stance. They are saying that if there is logistical support, rear-end logistical support, and there is a use of force. However, it is not ittaika, or it's not an integral part of that use of force, then that does not amount to the exercise of the use of force.
そこで私は先日の党首討論で安倍首相に聞きました。
So, given this strange position of the government, I asked Mr. Abe in the dire deliberations the other day.
国際法上武力の行使との一体化という概念そのものがあるんですかということです。
In other words, I asked him about this concept of ittaika, this being an integral part of the use of force. Is that a concept that exists in international law?
首相は一体化という概念そのものがございませんというふうに答弁しました。
And the response by Mr. Abe was there is no concept of ittaika or being an integral part of the use of force. This concept does not exist in international law.
ちなみに昨年7月の日本政府の、集団的自衛権行使容認の閣議決定の日本政府による英訳、これ仮訳でありますが、武力行使との一体化をどう訳しているのかを政府の公式文書で見てみましたら、一体化with the use of force というローマ字を捨てました。
In fact, the cabinet decision was made in July, which allowed for the self-defense forces to be deployed. In other words, there was the change in the interpretation of how the self-defense forces could be applied. And there is, and the interpreter has actually looked it up herself, and it's cabinet decision July 1st, 2014, provisional translation. And in regard to the section about ittaika, apparently the translators had difficulty translating it so that it is actually written in Roman letters, ittaika with the use of force. And then in parentheses it says integral part of the use of force.
一体化という概念を訳すことは誰にもできない。
In other words, the translator obviously the government could not find an appropriate English translation. They simply had to use the word 一体化 in an English document.
こういう世界で通用しないという点では、集団的自衛権の行使についての政府見解も同様であります。
I've given you some examples of these strange things that are occurring in Japan. In other words, these arguments and these concepts that do not hold water in international society. And I think also included among these strange ideas is the exercise of the use of collective defense.
政府は集団的自衛権の発動の要件として、日本と密接な関係にある他国に対する武力攻撃によって日本が存立危機事態に陥ることを挙げています。
As you know, what is being discussed right now is that the Japanese government wants to be able to have the ability, the current administration wants to be able to have the ability to allow self-defense forces to be deployed in the case where a country with very close relationship with Japan it comes under some kind of an armed attack or is involved in an armed attack, armed conflict, and this attack leads or has the potential to lead to the threatening the survival of Japan.
そして政府はこうした憲法解釈の変更をやった唯一最大の理由として国際情勢の根本的変容が起こったからだと説明しています。
And the government has gone to great lengths to try to achieve a change in the interpretation of the Constitution, the interpretation that the previous governments have held for many, many years. And the biggest reason they give, or the only fundamental reason they give for wanting this change in the interpretation of the Constitution, in the interpretation of the Constitution, the change in how the self-defense forces will be deployed, the only reason that they give is that there has been a huge transformation in the security environment surrounding Japan.
そこで私たちは国会で聞きました。
So we asked for more details in the Diet.
国際情勢の根本的変容というが、そうした根本的変容の下で他国に対する武力攻撃によって存立危機事態なるものに陥った国が世界に一つでもありますか。
So we asked for specific examples. Has there been any other country in the world that has seen a fundamental transformation in the security environment surrounding it, and that has seen its very existence threatened as a result of an attack on another country? Can you give an example of another country that has suffered a threat to its own survival?
外務大臣が答弁しまして、実例を挙げるのは困難ですというのが答弁でした。
And the response by the foreign minister was that it would be very difficult to provide an example.
一つも実例が挙げられない。
He could not provide even one example.
すなわち憲法解釈を変更した根拠が、根底から崩れたというのがこの間の論戦です。
In other words, it is very, very clear that the fundamental rationale for changing the interpretation of the Constitution has been overturned. In other words, that fundamental rationale does not hold up.
憲法9条の下ではもともと自衛隊の海外派兵というのは不可能なんです。
As you know, Article 9 specifically, under Article 9, it is specifically forbidden for self-defense forces to be deployed overseas.
それを取り繕おうとするから世界のどこにもない架空の概念を作り出すという矛盾に陥っています。
In other words, there are many paradoxes and other arguments that do not make sense that are being brought to play here. And the reason is because even though there is this restriction of Article 9, which forbids self-defense forces to be deployed abroad, the government wants to be able to deploy them abroad. And so they are making these different strange arguments that really simply do not hold up under international society. They're making up concepts that have never existed before.
自衛隊の世界的規模での派兵を企てながら 世界のどこにも通用しない詭弁で合理化することは許されるものではありません。
So using this kind of sophistry, in other words, fallacious arguments to justify the wishes of the desires of the government, to try to be able to, in spite of the fact that it goes against the Constitution, to try to allow the government to deploy self-defense forces worldwide, this kind of approach to achieving this kind of end is simply unacceptable.
大体私は心配になります。
All of these attempts filled me with great worry.
地球の裏側で米軍と自衛隊が共同行動している。
In other words, what we can envision in the future is that if this legislation passes, someday U.S. military forces and Japanese self-defense forces might be embroiled in combat on the other side of the globe.
その時に自衛隊がこうした後方支援は一体化するのにできないと米軍に言ったとします。
Say that the self-defense forces, at least at the beginning, are operating along the restrictions that are being discussed. In other words, they say to the self-defense forces people, say to the American forces, I'm sorry, we can no longer provide you with logistical support except at the very rear.
しかし米軍の方は一体化という英訳そのものがないんですから理解ができません。
In other words, we are forbidden, the self-defense forces would say, we are forbidden by law to provide itaika support. In other words, integral support. In other words, to combine all of our efforts with your efforts. We can only provide you with support from a distance. However, when the self-defense forces tries to explain that to the American forces persons have no idea of what the Japanese people are talking about because this idea of itaika does not simply exist in their minds.
第二の世界から見た異常として私は対米従属性ということを挙げたいと思います。
So I've been talking about some of the extraordinariness of the arguments that have been presented by the government. I'd like now to focus on another extraordinary aspect of this current deliberation, which has to do with the fact that Japan has long maintained a sense of subservience or dependence on the United States.
すなわちこの法案を推進している勢力が異常なアメリカ追随を特徴としているという問題です。
In other words, what defines or distinguishes the forces within Japan that are pushing for the passage of this legislation is that they are very much under the belief that Japan should always follow in the footsteps of the United States.
政府は集団的自衛権の発動の要件として我が国と密接な関係にある他国への武力攻撃が発生したことを挙げています。
In other words, I mentioned earlier that one of the conditions that is being discussed by the government as being placed on the issuing of orders to exercise the right to collective self-defense is that the condition must be that there is a country with whom Japan has a very close relationship that falls into armed combat or falls under armed attack.
私はこの場合その他国への武力攻撃がいかにして発生したか、ここから問題しなければならないと考えております。
I think that we must look at this statement much more carefully. We talk about this idea of this other country with whom Japan has a very close relationship falling under armed attack or being embroiled in armed attack. What exactly led to this armed attack? What exactly led to this armed conflict? We must look at that much more carefully.
すなわちこれが他国が先制攻撃を行ってそういう状態が生まれたのか、この場合はその他国は侵略国となります。
In other words, was it this country that we have a close relationship with that launched a preemptive strike on another third country? In that case, and did this preemptive strike lead to the armed attack situation? If that is the case, then that country with whom we have a very close relationship would be the aggressor country.
それとも他国に対する武力攻撃から戦争が開始されたのか、この場合はその他国は犠牲国になります。
Or was it that another third country attacked first the country with whom Japan has a close relationship, in which case that country with which we have a close relationship would be the victim in the situation?
私たちはここに追及すべき大問題があると考えて国会で質疑を行ってきました。
We believe that clarity about this situation was very, very important, and that's why we have continually asked questions in the Diet.
私は首相に聞きました。
I directly asked the Prime Minister.
米国が先制攻撃の戦争を行った場合でも集団的自衛権を発動するんですか。
I asked very specifically, even in the case where the U.S. forces were the ones that launched the first attack, in other words, they enacted a preemptive strike and then became embroiled in armed attack or armed conflict, even in that case, would you want the government to be able to exercise the right to collective self-defense?
首相は違法な武力行使をした国を日本が自衛権を発動して支援することはないと答弁しました。
Prime Minister Abe responded by saying that there will never be a situation where Japan would use its right to self-defense to help a country that had undertaken unlawful activities.
しかし問題は、日本政府が米国の違法な武力行使を違法と批判できるのかどうかにあります。
But although the Prime Minister said that it would not support or come to the defense of a country that had engaged in unlawful activities, unlawful, for example, launching of armed attacks, if the United States did such an unlawful activity, in other words, engaged in a preemptive strike, that would be considered unlawful, would Japan really be able to stand up and say, we're not going to support you, we don't approve of this?
戦後、米国はベトナム戦争、イラク戦争をはじめ、数多くの先制攻撃の戦争を実行してきました。
In other words, when we look at history, in the post-war years, after World War II, we have seen that the United States has been embroiled in many, many wars, the Vietnam War, the Iraq War, many other wars where the United States has taken the first attack. In other words, they have launched preemptive strikes.
しかし、日本政府は戦後ただの一度も米国の武力行使に反対したことがないんです。
But not once has the Japanese government ever stood up to the United States and said, we oppose these armed attacks that you have undertaken.
このような国は主要国の中で他に例を見ないと思います。
Of the major countries in the world, the several major countries of the world, I don't think there is another country in the world that has had Japan's track record in this way.
例えば1983年のグレナダ侵略。グレナダ。
Grenada, はい。For example, the invasion of Grenada in 1983.
このグレナダの侵略に対しては、日本以外の米国の同盟国もほとんどが反対をしました。
Most of the allies of the United States, excluding Japan, were against this invasion.
国連総会でも非難決議が上がりました。
There was also, a resolution that was passed in the General Assembly of the United Nations that decried this invasion.
しかし日本政府は理解の意思表示をしました。
However, the Japanese government displayed officially understanding of the United States position on this matter.
このような異常なアメリカ追随の国というのは、私は主要国の中で他に例を見ないと思います。
Again, I repeat what I've just said, which is that of the major nations of the world, I do not think there is any other nation that has shown such a position of subservience and dependence on the United States as Japan.
このような政府が、そしてそういう行動に反省のない政府が、違法な武力行使をした国を支援することはないと言って、誰が信用できるでしょうか。
In other words, given Japan's track record, the fact that not only has Japan never said no to supporting the United States, and not only that, Japan has shown no remorse for having taken these positions over the years, when this kind of a government basically says that we will not support a country that engages in unlawful armed attack activities, who can possibly believe such a government?
異常なアメリカ以内の国が集団的自衛権を行使する危険は極めて深刻だと言わなければなりません。
In other words, I'm not just simply talking about the past. I'm talking about the fact that Japan is an extraordinary country in this regard. And as a result, I think there is a very, very distinct danger that Japan will eventually exercise its right to collective self-defense and embroil Japan in battle.
最後に第3の問題です。
And the third problem that I would like to bring to your attention.
歴史逆行性ということを挙げたいと思います。
I would like to talk about going against the tides of history.
すなわち、過去の日本の戦争を間違った戦争と言えない安倍政権が戦争法案を推進する危険ということです。
I think there's a great danger in the fact that we see the Abe administration, an administration which cannot acknowledge that the war of the past, specifically World War II, was a mistaken war. The fact that this administration is now promoting or pushing forward with these war bills, I think this is a great danger.
今年は戦後70年です。
As you know, this is the 70th year following the end of World War II.
この節目の年に 日本が過去の戦争にどういう基本姿勢を取るかは極めて重大な問題です。
As you know, because this is a milestone year, the official stance that Japan takes in regard to how it views the war is of great importance.
5月20日の党首討論で、私は安倍首相に対して、1945年8月に受諾したポツダム宣言を引用して、過去の日本の戦争は間違った戦争との認識があるかと正しました。
On May 20th, when there was a question and answer session between the leaders of the different political parties, I asked Prime Minister Abe about the Potsdam Declaration, which was accepted by Japan in August of 1945. I quoted from it, and I basically asked Mr. Abe, the Potsdam Declaration basically has as its basis the understanding that Japan views the previous war as a mistaken war, literal translation, mistaken war, an erroneous war. And did Mr. Abe accept this understanding that the war of World War II was a mistake for Japan?
安倍首相は頑なに間違った戦争と認めることを拒み続けました。
But Prime Minister Abe continued to resist accepting this interpretation that the war that had occurred in the past was a mistake.
加えて、この党首討論の中で安倍首相がポツダム宣言をまだつまびらかに、読んでいないと答弁したことが内外に衝撃を与えました。
And not only this, during this question and answer session between the political party leaders, Mr. Abe went on to say that he had not read the Potsdam Declaration in great detail, and that was, of course, a very, very shocking statement for the leader of the nation to make.
安倍政権はこの問題については閣議決定の答弁書を決定しました。閣議決定答弁書を決定しました。
So, in regard to this question and answer session, this was passed as part of the cabinet resolution.
党首討論の後のことです。
I'm sorry. And in spite of the fact that this question and answer session was held, the Abe administration went ahead and with their cabinet decision.
そこにはこう書かれていました。こう書かれていました。こう書かれていました。そこにはこう書かれていました。
I'm sorry. And inside the cabinet decision, this was written. The following was written. Excuse me.
首相は当然ポツダム宣言を読んでいると。
In the cabinet decision that was passed, it was stated clearly that Prime Minister Abe has read the Potsdam Declaration.
読んでいるというんだったら、あの時の答弁は何だったのかということになります。
But this was the official version of the question and answer session that was published. However, but what actually happened in the question and answer session was that he admitted that he had not read it in detail. So what was the point of having such a deliberation in the Diet if a different version is printed?
戦後の国際秩序は日本とドイツとイタリアが行った戦争は侵略戦争だったという判定の上に成り立っています。
As you know, in the post-war years, it has been the fundamental understanding of international society and international order has been based on the fundamental understanding that in the previous war, the Axis countries, Japan, Italy, and Germany, waged a war of belligerence.
ところが安倍首相は侵略戦争はおろか、間違った戦争とも認めることをしません。
So the word that is being used is shinryaku, which is translated sometimes as belligerence, sometimes as a war of invasion. But not only did Mr. Aggression, thank you very much. Not belligerence, aggression, a war of aggression. Not only did he not accept that it was a war of aggression, but he did not even accept that it was a war that was a mistaken war.
過去の戦争への反省のない勢力が憲法9条を壊して海外で戦争する国への道を暴走するというのはこれほどアジアと世界にとって危険なことはないと言わなければなりません。
So again, I repeat what I said earlier. This is an administration that does not feel remorse or a sense of guilt about the previous war. And this is, however, an administration that is intent on basically destroying Article 9 and intent on being able to deploy its forces to engage war anywhere in the world. This, I think, is a development that poses tremendous dangers not only for Asia but for the world.
以上3つの角度から 国際的な異常性と危険性についてお話しさせていただきました。
So I focus on three major aspects, and that I hope will help you understand the extraordinariness, the unusualness, the strangeness of the discussions that are going on in Japan, and also the dangers of the arguments that are considering that are around this security legislation.
昨日与党は、国会の会期を95日間、史上最長の延長することを強行いたしました。
As you know, because the ruling parties have a majority in the Diet, yesterday they pushed forth a bill that would, they pushed forth a decision so that the current Diet session would be extended by 95 days. This is the longest extension of a Diet session in history.
しかし私は、この奇数がどうなるかを握っているのは国民の世論だと考えております。
Having said this, however, I believe how this will play out in the future, I think the key to this question lies in what the public thinks.
国民の文字通りの圧倒的多数がこれに反対の意思表示をした場合には、いかに与党が国会で多数を持っていたとしても強行することはできません。
In other words, if there are enough voices raised in the public so that it is very, very clear that the majority of the people in Japan are against this kind of legislation, then even though the fact that the ruling parties have the majority of seats, a huge number of seats in the Diet, I do not think they will be able to force this legislation through.
私たちは国会の論戦と国民運動の両面で、そうした確固たる国民的な圧倒的多数派を作るために力を尽くしたいと考えております。
So we intend to continue to push forth our arguments in the Diet deliberations and also to work with citizens' movements so that we will be able to create a very clear majority in the public that are against this
ありがとうござい
legislation.
ました。
Thank you for your kind attention.
あとはご質問いただければと思います。
So now I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much.